Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in a minute or two. While we're waiting, if you could, go ahead and click on the chat. And if you could, just introduce yourself, where you're from, and kind of what you do. That would be great. Great. Thank you, everyone, for posting who you are in the chat. If you're just joining us, you can click on the chat button, and if you could introduce yourself, where you're from, what's your institution, maybe what you do, that would be great. And we're going to go ahead and get underway here. And I want to welcome everyone to today's online teaching and learning through disruption webinar. This is the second webinar in the series that Achieving the Dream is offering. Last Wednesday, we did offer our first webinar in this series, and today we're going to be talking about communication and engagement strategies online. We're kind of drilling down into some of the topic areas that we talked about last week, and so we're really glad you could make it. We know that everyone is, excuse me, is busy. And so we appreciate you taking the time, taking this hour with us, and hopefully we'll provide you with some great strategies and resources that you can feel like this was time well spent. My name is Richard Sebastian. I'm gonna turn my camera on here briefly. I'm the Director of Open and on Digital Learning here at Achieving the Dream. And I'm gonna be a Master of Ceremonies today, more or less. Before we get started with the presentation today on communication engagement strategies, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping, especially if you're new to the Zoom environment. I know many people are faculty are discovering Zoom in the past few weeks as the main kind of mechanism for kind of synchronized connection and meetings. But if you're not familiar with it, well, today we'll be using some of the tools in Zoom to kind of solicit questions and responses from you. So if you look at your screen, it should look something like what we have on the slide. So you can, on the left-hand side at the bottom, you have audio settings. That's where you can, if you're having trouble hearing, that you should be able to adjust your audio settings there. You're not going to be able to, your audio is disabled as far as your microphone and your camera, since we have quite a few people on the webinar today that we're not able to offer audio and video to everyone. You have another set of buttons at the bottom that allow you to chat or Q&A. So we're going to be using the chat feature today. Really, you can use that just for responses. If you have comments, our presenters today are going to ask a few questions and ask you to respond in the chat. So the chat's really kind of more free form. If you click on the Q&A button, that's the box that pops up is we're going to ask you to post your formal questions for presenters for our Q&A session at the end of the webinar today. So we will have a period of time where we'll get to those questions and try to answer as many as we can. So that's what you can use the Q&A button for. And then you can see when you click on the chat button, it opens up a box to the left where you can enter your comments, responses. Everyone can see your chat, so it goes to all attendees and all the panelists. So that's kind of a general overview of the Zoom environment. We're also recording today's webinar. We will be posting the recording and the slides, and I'll tell you where that is in a second. So let's go ahead and advance. Many of you, so these webinars are free and open to the public, and what we found last week that a number of people joined us who weren't familiar with Achieving the Dream. So if you're not a member of our network or you're not aware of this organization, we're an organization, a nonprofit that works with community colleges across the country. We have about a little over 270 member colleges in our network. We're in about 44 states and District of Columbia. And we have a kind of a cadre of coaches that work with our colleges, going on over 60 now, and have impacted millions of students during our life as an organization. And what ATD really focuses on is institutional transformation of community colleges. So if you're a member of our network, you have coaches come and work with a team at your institution to really help improve outcomes for your students, kind of build up the capacity of your institution in these 7 areas that you can see on the kind of green wheel on the screen. We focus on the 7 areas to help your institution create a kind of a student-focused culture. So that's what we do. This webinar and the webinars that we're offering are really our effort to try and support our colleges during this time and be responsive in helping them out, kind of helping them, really any colleges now, kind of accommodate themselves to the new reality of having to move online as these campus closures happen. Yep. I'd like to also introduce right now Dr. Karen Stout. She is the president and CEO of Achieving the Dream, and she's going to say a few words for us today. Hey, Karen.
Thanks, Richard. I turned on my video for a little bit as well. I want to thank everyone for joining us in the webinar this afternoon. We had 250 people register, and I see that participants are over 150 and still growing. Certainly, this new COVID environment is testing all of us, and in many ways is beginning to touch us personally. So I appreciate your willingness to jump into this webinar while you're balancing so many things, personal and professional, at this point in time. ATD is working rapidly to reposition our supports for our colleges. And I think you see that in the work of the teaching and learning team. They're exceptional, and I'm just really proud to be part of this team working to support you. Our institutions are amazing and doing innovative things, from turning their parking lots into Wi-Fi hotspots to donating PPE equipment to even manufacturing PPE equipment. And most recently this morning, I saw that Lorraine Community College has taken 3D printers from an ideation lab, moved them into homes, and they're developing and producing manufacturing safety kits using those 3D printers. Our faculty are also amazingly resilient and agile. And I've been following a lot of the innovations of faculty on social media. There was one that gave me a good belly laugh last night, posted by a faculty member who was hosting virtual office hours, and no students showed up, and she broke into and recorded a all by myself rendition, which has a lot of views on social media. So we're also working with a great sense of humor and humility. There are so many of our colleges on this call. There are colleges from all over the country. There are faculty members, advisors, student affairs professionals. I saw at least one person from South Africa. I saw at least one representative from our tribal colleges and universities, and I saw one representative from one of our key partners, the Belk Center. So certainly the reach of these webinars is far and wide. Last week, I spoke a little bit about not just student care right now, but also institutions needing to care for faculty and supporting your success. And I'm hoping that we can continue to talk about what those institutional supports can look like in some other sessions that would be upcoming. Here's what I'm learning as I talk to presidents and some of the faculty that are on the campuses of the colleges that I coach. I'm understanding that we don't have a good handle on what withdrawal rates might look like at this point in the semester. And I think that the timing and topic for this webinar is essential given that. So some faculty are saying, we're not sure about withdrawal rates, but we are not able to track students that were in our face-to-face courses before spring break that now just have not checked in with us online. And when they do try to implement strategies to connect with students, sometimes the students are not responding. And it may be because they're in transit. They're moving to a place where they're seeking shelter. It may not be where the institutional contact system has them residing. I know that we have probably not fully leveraged our LMS systems and helped faculty to figure out ways to communicate those types of absences so that our student affairs professionals and counselors and others can triage and reach out to those students. I know a number of our institutions are setting up call centers just to do that. And those calls are activated by faculty on the front lines who know whether students are in the classroom, and if they are in the classroom, they're able to determine whether their engagement rate or not is equal to or similar to the engagement that they had with the students in a face-to-face environment. One of the things we'll talk about in today's webinar is the importance of knowing your students, and ATD has always emphasized this, but this is a different type of knowledge of our students, and we're beginning to call that the intersectionality of the students in our classrooms. And understanding that there are students are veterans, they can be veterans, they can be parents, they can be working, all these different demographics that in the past we've siloed in our disaggregation are now coming together and forcing us to think much more holistically about the students in our classrooms. I know having teaching presence right now is challenging. Any type of presence right now for us as individuals is challenging. So I just want to thank all of the faculty on the call and the student affairs professionals and administrators and advisors who are being present for students right now while you're balancing presence in your own personal lives during this very, very difficult time. I know your capacity is limited, and the college's capacities are limited, and certainly our learners' capacities are limited as well. So hopefully today we'll share some strategies to support you, and I look forward to listening in and participating in the chat. And again, thank you to the ATD teaching and learning team and your leadership and resilience, agility, and your presence. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Karen. Really quickly, this is a series of webinars. So this is the second in a series of 4. We have 2 more after this. I'll post a link in the chat where you'll be able to find out more about the series if you want to register for additional webinars. And really, as I said at the top of the call, we're really putting these together to try to be responsive to the college's needs right now. And to that end, we're not 100% sure what you need. We want to hear from you. From like the topics that you think we should address, or any kind of other resources that you need to get the support from us or others as we kind of deal with the challenges ahead with the COVID-19 crisis. You will find the resources from this webinar, from last week's webinars, as well as many, many more. And these are going to change. We're going to add to these at this site. So if you can see the URL there, is our COVID-19 response resources. It's open, so it's not just for ATD members. Anyone can access this. If you go to the 2 kind of links that I've highlighted there, you'll find the webinars and recordings and slides and for these sessions there. And feel free to share those with your colleagues that maybe couldn't attend. And now I'm going to, we have 2 ATD presenters today, and I'm going to turn it over to John Uzzini, who's our Director of Teaching and Learning at Achieving the Dream, and he's going to kick off the session today.
Thank you, Richard, and thanks again, Karen, for joining us. We're thrilled to see such a great turnout again today. We know everyone is being perhaps overwhelmed with invitations to various webinars. We know you have a lot of choices of how you spend your very limited time right now, and we're grateful that you're spending some of it with us. We really hope that these webinars are giving you, both a sense of helpful information and connection to resources that are really coming to you just in time, but also we want to make sure we're helping people to feel connected. We know that for many of us, we are feeling isolated. We're also grieving right now. We're grieving the loss of what our institutions and organizations felt like just a few weeks ago. We're grieving the loss of a semester that we had planned out and envisioned going a certain way, and it's going quite differently now for us. Our students are grieving. So there's a real need for connection, even for those of us who would describe ourselves as introverts. So I appreciate that folks are carving out a bit of time each week to come together this way. This is our teaching and learning team. I'm grateful to Susan Adams, who's taken a leadership role with Richard Sebastian in designing and carrying out these webinars. I also want to acknowledge the great work of Francesca Carpenter, Ruwanda Garth McCullough, and Shauna Taylor. They're all on with us today, and you'll probably be connecting with them in the chat as we continue. So let me tell you a little bit about this session specifically today. Many of you, I think, were with us a week ago, and we hope that you'll continue to be with us over the coming weeks as we continue this series. For today, we're focusing on connection and engagement. In general, in higher ed teaching and learning, we know that connection with our students is essential. We know that students are likely to continue on with us at the institution to the extent that they feel a sense of connection with their faculty, with their peers, and with the institution. And so we want to help you think about how to do that in this environment, in this remote environment. So we have two key areas of focus for today. One is how to effectively communicate with your students, even when access may be challenging. So we know that for some on this call, you do have access to really advanced tools, and so do your students, but we know in many cases students do not have that kind of access, or institutions don't have that kind of access, and we want to help you to think about low-tech ways that you can support connection in this remote environment. And second, we want to think about how to create engaging learning experiences that allow your students to both collaborate with their peers and to work independently at a distance. Both are going to be important in this time. And there are tools, and not just tools, but strategies, moves that you can make as an instructor to help support that kind of work and that kind of communication and engagement. So here are our intended outcomes. We hope that you'll leave this webinar with a sense of how to create a communication plan that you can carry out as an instructor for the course, and also a plan that you'll ask the same of your students. We hope to help you think about how to bring a human touch to this online communication strategy. It's one thing to have become comfortable doing that when we know we're going to see our students in person twice a week or 3 times a week. It's quite different when we don't know when we're going to see them again in person, and so we have to do the best we can with the tools that we have access to. Third, we hope that you'll understand how to create digital spaces for a true community of learners to engage with each other. And we really want to help you think about this in a way that this is not one directional, faculty to student, faculty to student. It's about communication between you and your students back and forth. It's also about facilitating connections and communication between students among peers. And finally, as we did last week, we want to continue to pull this thread through all of this work. Let's think about what it means to employ an equity mindset in doing this work and to create culturally affirming interactions in the remote classroom. So that's an overview of where we're headed for this hour. I'm going to turn it now to our colleague, Susan Adams.
Thanks so much, John. Briefly revisiting last week's webinar, we presented 3 basic elements to consider when teaching a course online, and that was connection, content, and context. We touched on how to get content to your students online and how to provide context for that content, how to do direct instruction online. And we covered briefly how to communicate with your students online. So today we're going to dive more deeply into that connection element by answering these questions around how will you communicate with your students, how will they communicate with each other, and how can we foster a community of learning online. We'll organize today's webinar around 3 principles. Communicate early and often with approaches that ensure you get to know your students. Setting expectations by thinking through a communication plan for you, and tapping into your students' preferences and current needs. We'll also share reminders to maintain in that equity mindset and culturally affirming interactions. It's sometimes hard to remember that online teaching is not about the technology. It's about how we use the technology to engage our students. So we can do this with a combination of facilitation and design choices to create a space where students feel seen, connected, and supported in the online learning environment. Strategies for communicating with your students can come in many forms. Your communication plan can include things like recording an introductory lecture about yourself and inviting students to do the same. You can send a weekly announcement sharing updates, reminders, and clear directions that orient them to the content and the work for the week. You can also hold virtual office hours each week, and often forgotten is communicating with students through feedback of their work by annotating a paper or providing feedback via an audio or video message. One great way to get to know your students and help them succeed in their new online learning environment is to learn their stories, hear their needs, their preferences, and ask them for suggestions for how best we can support them. Dr. Luke and Dr. Frank in San Diego gave some great examples in their recent webinar on employing equity-minded and culturally affirming teaching practices online. So here, these can be asked in an online survey in your LMS or in an email. And what this does is send a strong message that you get that times are hard and you generally want to know them. So it's a great thing to ask them if they've ever taken an online course before, and if it's not their first time, what works well for them. And do they have any concerns about taking the course? And also ask about their tech. Are they using a private computer, public computer? You know, are they sharing it with their family? Do they have a tablet or a mobile phone that they're primarily taking the course on? And that'll help inform giving you sort of preemptive ways to think about what tech and inform your tech choices. And how can you best facilitate their learning? What are some of their preferences there? And asking them to share anything else they would like with you. When considering that students are now spending their learning time online, it's important that the experience is meaningful and relevant to them. This not only increases engagement, but can motivate students to sustain their engagement and feel like a contributing member to the class, also while fostering a sense of belonging. So try creating discussion areas for sharing stories, updates, a place to ask questions, or even share news relevant to the course content. And this can be separate from the weekly discussions around the readings or the content of the course, if that's what you're choosing. And it's important to find ways to construct meaning together. This can be done in a facilitated discussion board in your LMS or an email thread. You can also do this through annotating an article as a group, which I'll speak to in a moment. Again, finding ways for students to express themselves through writing, voice, video, helps them to be known and fosters connection with others and their peers. And consider creating opportunities for students to engage outside of class. Perhaps suggest or have a student create virtual study groups, virtual meetups, or class social media page. When considering your approach, as you start to redesign your activities, start by asking yourself, how can this activity or assessment connect to students' personal experience and expertise, or even their professional practice? And how can what students produce in the course be part of the content of the course? And how can the activity allow for constructing meaning together? So here are some technical design approaches. Well-crafted discussion questions in a discussion board in your LMS, along with your teaching presence, can foster a true community of learning and meaning making together. This can also be done in email threads and texts for those choosing lower tech options. You can also create shared docs with prompts that can act as wikis where students collaboratively generate content. You can invite students to create blogs and comment on them. This can be done in a shared doc or use free blog tools online. Also consider journaling activities where students share the document only with you, but populate it each week. You can also create text threads easily through WhatsApp, which I'll share, and or for a bit of a higher tech option, you can create channels of conversation in an application called Slack. And if you're ready and comfortable, you can create a Twitter hashtag for conversations and sharing in the open web. For socializing and connecting outside of academic activities, you can consider a Facebook group. And finally, one of my favorite activities to do online with my students is to socially annotate. Here's a screenshot, an example of a socially annotated article in The Atlantic done using the app Hypothesis. The highlighted text includes comments that are seen with a pop-out column on the right. Students can comment on each other's comments, and this can be done publicly or as a private group. This is a great way to construct meaning together and replicate the classroom discussions right on top of an online article. This can also be done inside of a shared document. You can copy the URL to these annotated spaces and send it out to students to join in the learning. Much of these ideas I've shared invite learning to occur in an asynchronous digital environment that is not live, but occurring at the convenience of the students. So designing a class in this way offers opportunities for extended reflection as students read each other's posts or annotations with time to craft their response. It also allows students to do additional research that can be brought into that discussion, and it increases their digital fluency and allows for many-to-many interactions. There are two misconceptions that often hinder teachers' creativity when thinking about teaching online. The first is the tendency to think of ways to approximate their face-to-face teaching into an online format as much as possible. The second is a belief that text is less personal and that immediacy is inherently more valuable. Instead, I'd like to suggest the consideration of the possibility afforded by this new medium of the internet itself, the LMS or even email threads. With some thoughtfulness and guidance, it's possible to consider the diverse opportunities for engagement and communication that the internet has to offer. And I invite you to consider the strengths of online learning, especially for adult learners, might lie in their peer-to-peer interactions in these digital spaces. It's important that these spaces are facilitated, which requires you maintaining your teaching presence. And you do not need to be online 24/7, but tracking discussion boards every few days is a good idea, and letting students know the frequency they can expect from you. I often see instructors ask for initial posts from students on Wednesdays and responses to their peers by Sunday, and consistency is key. A lot of the tech that I've introduced today, you may not be familiar with, and I highly encourage you, if you're interested in wanting to set that up, to consider scheduling a consultation with our teaching and learning team. We offer those where we can give personalized, personalized consultation and sort of tech details within your context. So I know I've presented a lot of ideas, and certainly use us as support for learning how to set those up for your particular course. So now we'd like to do a chat share. We've given a lot of ideas, but I also know there's a lot of expertise that's here on this webinar. So we'd love you to share with us and your colleagues ways you've communicated with your students and supported students in communicating with each other. And particularly interested, what examples of digital spaces created for students to interact with have you created? We'd love to see that in the chat. We'll give you a few minutes. I'm seeing Remind as a communication tool, Microsoft Teams. Cyber Cafe, open time where students can sign in. That's great. Again, the naming convention of a cafe really helps students understand what that is meant to be used for. Padlet's a great tool, yeah. Virtual sticky notes.
Susan, some people listed Blackboard Collaborate.
Great. So. Collaborate is similar to Zoom, but it's embedded within the LMS. So it's a web conferencing, but also allows for annotation and sharing of documents. Miro is one I haven't seen before. That's great. Someone's saying adding polls to the session to get that interaction happening.
I like that point very much from Wendy Zoll-Philgrove. And she says, our students have access to Collaborate. They've posted times and discussion board to make small groups to support each other. That I think is really consistent with the points we're trying to make today, that some of our role here as instructors in these classes is about creating the spaces, the opportunities for students to support each other. It doesn't necessarily always have to be about the instructor supporting the students.
That's great. And also using spaces someone's sharing for students to present their PowerPoints and then discuss it. Yeah, and there are breakout rooms in Zoom for those that are comfortable with that. And you can pop into each breakout room as it's happening. Pour at 4. That's great.
I like what Leonore Perez just shared. Students started volunteering to present in the class, which she did not expect. She gave them that space so that they can take ownership of the class. You know, very often we see that the way students engage in a remote forum is going to be different from how they previously did or did not feel comfortable engaging in a face-to-face environment. So there are perhaps opportunities here that we might not even have anticipated going into this.
And one of the questions about the breakout rooms, can students do work on projects together? Absolutely. And you can all sort of watch that happening live. You can supplement a breakout group with a shared doc. So that could be like a handout that they go to in addition to being in the room, that they would click over to and type in answers to prompts that you already have on the shared doc. That works nicely for the breakout design.
Few people ask about the logistics of creating these breakout rooms, and Cheryl Morgan Duncan just posted a helpful link from the Zoom support page that explains exactly how to do it. It's very simple. Once you've become somewhat comfortable with Zoom in general, using that feature is actually quite simple, and it really does give students the experience of being in like a breakout discussion, the way you might have, you know, broken up a class in a face-to-face environment and sent students into small circles of 4 or 5 people. You can do something very similar in Zoom and then bring the class back for a full group share out.
Another tool that acts kind of like a forum thread is Flipgrid, and it creates little mini videos, but they show up as kind of card decks on the screen, kind of like Padlet, where you get to see people's faces and you get to listen to a small video and then respond with a video in kind within these different threads. It's a nice layout.
It looks like a few people are pointing out they're not seeing everything that's being posted in the chat. So when you type something in the chat, make sure in that blue area that it says all panelists and attendees. If it only says all panelists, then only the few of us who are presenting today will see what you're writing. We will make sure that we share an archive of everything that was posted into this chat when we share the recording and the slides.
All right. Well, thanks for everybody sharing. These are great ideas. And like John said, we will document this and send it as post it to you after we're done with the webinar. So John, I'll pass it off to you for the next portion.
Great. Thank you, Susan. And thank you everyone for your engagement. It's really great to see all of these terrific ideas. It's, you know, it's only been a couple of weeks, for some of us 1 week, that folks have been teaching in this remote environment. And I think people are finding ways to be really resourceful and you know, figuring things out as they go. And there's a tremendous amount that we can share across this network. And we're thrilled to see this level of engagement. So Susan's provided some really helpful information about communication. So one of the things we know is really important in a face-to-face environment holds true and is perhaps even more important in an online remote environment. And that's setting expectations and creating norms. And even if you've already made the shift at your institution 2 or 3 weeks ago to the remote environment, it's not too late to establish some norms now. So if you haven't already, let your students know how you plan to communicate with them. What should they be looking for? What should they be anticipating, and with what frequency? So should they be expecting emails from you, and on what schedule? Should they be looking for posts in the learning management system, and on what schedule? It's also important that you tell students both how often you expect them to check their email, just in general, and then how quickly they can expect your response. Students come into this kind of dynamic with different expectations about how accessible an instructor or others involved in their learning experience should be. And it's good for you to set clear and reasonable expectations, and then to remind people, to remind folks in the class about what those expectations and norms should be. We have a great example from Michelle Pacansky-Brock that we want to share. And this is what it looks like when you've had some engagement with your students about creating norms and shared expectations. Michelle calls this a learning pact, and she talks about being a learning partner. What we love about this is that she's sharing with students on the left what they can expect from her, but at the same time, what she expects of them. And in some ways, this is also helpful for students to think about what should they be expecting from each other to support each other through this very challenging time. So some examples. Michelle says, I will regularly communicate with you. I will be flexible. I will provide a supportive and trustworthy environment for you to share and discuss ideas with your peers. And at the same time, she is telling students, here's what she expects from them. You will treat your peers with dignity and respect. When you make a mistake, because you will, we all do, you'll view it as an opportunity to learn and grow. You will contact me when you have concern about meeting a due date. One of the things we really want to reinforce here is a pact like this comes across in the way that's most helpful to students if they have helped to create it. So we urge you to not just make a list of what students will experience or perceive as rules or policies, and rather ask students, what sorts of expectations should we have for each other? What do you think I should expect of you to help you be successful in this course? And what would be reasonable for you to expect from me? You can always add to that list if there are things you feel students haven't thought of. But to make this an experience where you're surfacing these norms and these expectations together, that really changes the feeling that students have about why you're doing this, and then what is it going to mean for the relationship that you all have going forward in this class. We've heard questions from folks about rigor and concerns about, are we losing rigor as we make this transition to this remote environment? This question comes most frequently from instructors who are least comfortable teaching in this environment and have the least experience with it. So we want to encourage you to allow yourself some space here to pause and to think about this issue. But what we really want to remind you of is the importance of conveying unconditional positive regard for your students. I think it would be easy to make assumptions about where students are in their engagement with a course during this time of transition. And I think we all need to remember how much stress everyone is under right now, how much instability we have in our lives, how much right now is unpredictable going forward. So this is not a suggestion that we get rid of rigor, but it is a suggestion that we think about how students are experiencing the ways we communicate with them. It's more critical than ever, we would say, that we help our students to reject deficit perspectives, deficit ways of thinking that they might have about their ability to succeed in your course and in college more broadly. We believe that we can hold high expectations for performance while continuing to send messages of belonging and affirming abilities. It's amazing what a simple text message or email, just a couple of lines encouraging a student in a personal way, letting them know that you noticed something that was really great that they did, either on an assignment or just in an informal discussion forum. Students might feel now more than ever that they are not being seen. And this is a really great opportunity to remind students that you do see them, that the relationship you have with them is so important to you as their instructor, as their teacher, and that you want to keep reinforcing that going forward. We want to come back also to the points that were made by Luke Wood and Frank Harris in their webinar on equity-minded approaches for teaching online. We're going to include a link to their webinar in the resources we post after the session today, but we thought it was important to elevate and amplify these 5 points. We think this is so consistent with the other information we've shared today, and so consistent with how we often talk about the ways we want to engage with our students at all of Achieving the Dreams learning opportunities. So number one, be intrusive. In whatever ways you have available to you through your learning management system and your other tools, do what you can to actively track your students' progress towards learning, see where students are disengaging, and reach out proactively before it is too late. We know that in a normal face-to-face schedule, there are certain key points in the semester where we might lose students. Certainly right now through this transition, we know it's likely that we're going to lose students, and whatever we can do to reach out proactively, it's going to make a difference. Number two, be relational. Make moves either when you're in a Zoom session like this that foster relationships, but also when you're communicating asynchronously. Anything you can do to establish and maintain connection with students at an individual, personalized level, it's going to make such a difference. Be culturally relevant and affirming. Whatever you can to design an environment in your learning management system, in your broader remote environment, anything you can do to help students feel welcomed and included is going to make a difference. Number four, be community focused. We know that at times it can be uncomfortable to require interaction. There are ways to do this though, where students don't feel that you're putting them on the spot or that you're singling them out in a punitive way. So we encourage you to create activities that require collaboration. That doesn't necessarily mean that each student needs to raise their hand and speak up on a Zoom session in front of their classmates if you are already aware that's going to be uncomfortable for students. But whatever you can do to scaffold these kinds of learning opportunities, help students over the next few weeks in the semester to become increasingly comfortable with this kind of communication and collaboration, that's really going to mean something significant for their likely success in your course. And then number five, be race conscious. Be intentional about providing opportunities to engage in racial and equity issues within the context of your course. Now, at one level, this means making sure that all of your students have an opportunity to be heard, that all of your students have voice in whatever communication format you're using for your course. But it also means when you think about your course material, what opportunities are there to engage with issues of race and equity? Sometimes people are quick to say, you know, I teach X, so issues of race and equity are not relevant for me. We would gently push back on that and say, these are issues that are relevant in every discipline, in every area that we teach. Our students need to know from us now more than ever that they are getting what they need from us to be successful. If you're not sure about this issue, if you feel like you don't quite have the vocabulary around it, or you're not entirely comfortable with how to engage with it, please sign up for one of the consultation times that we have available. This is something we're happy to talk with you about more one-on-one and give you some support around. So we're going to move now into Q&A. We saw some really wonderful suggestions in the chat earlier. What we'd like to ask you to do now is use the Q&A button that Richard demonstrated earlier, and let us know what questions you have for us and for each other. And we've very intentionally framed this as, what questions do you have? Not, do you have any questions? So the assumption is you should have questions, and we're excited to get into conversation.
So John and Susan have been monitoring the Q&A box here. We do have some questions. There's also some appearing in the chat. One question from Beatrice DeMello is, she has a music appreciation class, and she says 75% of the students did not have the video on. So I'm assuming it was like a Zoom session. Do we have rules about this? There is no certain way to know that they are in fact present. So how would you respond to kind of using the kind of video feature as a kind of measurement of presence for an online course?
One way to do that is in the chat, like we did today, just as people arrive to the course, having them type their name in the chat, knowing that they're there. And, you know, we do encourage video. There's no rules for that. I can imagine that there might be some issues where people feel uncomfortable showing their video, but having people declare that they're there, asking questions for people to answer in either the chat tool or the Q&A tool is a great way to show presence and having students, recognizing that students are there. I don't know if anybody else has a different answer to that.
I think that was a good one. Trudy Bears has a question. Has anyone had experience pairing students who are comfortable with online tools with students who are not familiar or comfortable for some peer tutoring?
Anybody in the chat saying yes, we can connect them with Trudy, but that is a great strategy. Kind of giving your answer in your question in a way. I have done that in my courses, kind of doing a mini assessment similar to the informal one we presented around getting to know student preferences. But yeah, that's a great way to sort of track, if you can, or map those that are feeling comfortable and those that are not. And also asking for volunteers in the class of who'd be willing to group up with some students that could use some technical support.
So this next question, I don't know, it seems like a plant for John. Maybe it's one of his friends. What resource from Alicia Conley? What resources on campus, John, would you recommend be leveraged by faculty that are not comfortable moving to online instruction? Could you talk about the value of a center for teaching and learning or a similar resource?
Thank you, Alicia. That's a great question. So, we know that those units, those programs, those areas of support look different at different Achieving the Dream colleges, but most have some form of a professional development hub for faculty, a center for teaching and learning, a center for learning innovation. Many of these centers have instructional designers, instructional technologists on staff. Many have faculty fellows or other faculty leaders who are available to support you in a peer coaching way. So we'd encourage you, if you have not been in regular contact with that center or that committee or office on your campus, take this as an opportunity now to reach out to them and seek their support. Chances are they have some way to support you either one-on-one or in small groups with your colleagues.
Great, lots of questions coming in here. We'll take a few more. Let's see. This is a question, and Susan's really about a specific resource that you may know of, but Zena asks, is there a survey available to establish readiness amongst staff and students to go online? I guess online readiness. And I know there are quite a few, but do you know any kind of specific ones you would recommend? Or
yeah, what I can do is send that out in our follow-up email. I'm thinking of 3 right now, but they're coming from community colleges and institutions that do have an online readiness kind of website that helps students to ask them the questions around their tech and also their experience, but track that through a survey. So yeah, there's plenty out there, and I can try to find some. And what we'll do is we'll put it on that COVID-19 response resource page that we're offering in the teaching and learning area. So that's publicly available and will be in our resources that we send out to you. Great question.
Let's see, this is a good one. Ingrid Lindberg asks, how do I teach using Zoom with cell phones only, no computers? Also, what can I teach using email access from their cell phones?
Great question. Yeah, Zoom on the phone does work. They can either actually launch the Zoom app and get into a video where we can actually see them on video if the bandwidth is strong enough. Alternatively, they can call in using their phone without the app. So you can be on your computer, but students can call in using the phone. You can also actually broadcast from the phone. You might want to test that out with a friend or a colleague first, but it's absolutely doable on the phone itself. And teaching a class through email, I would recommend you watching the previous webinar where I spoke to how to present content kind of in weekly chunks, where you give an overview of the content for the week, along with focused narratives that describe each of the readings. So there's ways in which you can do that as a weekly email, sending out kind of what you would in an LMS module, but also starting a thread of conversation on your email to have discussions happen that way.
Great. Here's another a good question. I've been having a hard. This is from I don't know how to pronounce their name. I'll say Gita Vafe. My apologies if I butchered your name. I've been having a hard time getting students to respond to my emails or joining our video meetings. Some students absolutely have no communication. What is your suggestion to make them communicate with me.
Yeah, that can be a tough one. You could try, and obviously depending on the volume, this may not be viable, but to have a personal phone call to that student or a text, maybe even one or two, to sort of gauge what's happening there, to get a sense of what might be occurring for just one student, but might be occurring for many. So that personal reach out can really help. And like John said, going to your campus resources, if there is a student support area that also might be trying to reach out to students and have resources for them, you could have those at the ready when you do make that call. When students give you what their needs are, you can have the local and your student support services resources available to share with them to help mitigate whatever might be the barrier to them connecting with you.
Great. There's been a couple of questions related to privacy, FERPA rules. Julie Phil-Yall's question, does anyone have a consistent statement about recording synchronous sessions? Are you getting written or verbal permission from all of your students to record the session? I suspect recording requirements vary by state. So I know we're in some ways uncharted territory. But do you have any kind of advice about how to approach, student privacy, security, and also kind of legal requirements for student data?
Yeah, it is important to make sure the privacy is upheld, and we're in such a reconfiguration that I can see a lot of that being gone to the wayside. So there is not new, but there are sort of COVID FERPA regulations and best practices that is up on that COVID site that we shared. And I haven't read through all of that completely, but that's a place to get sort of your state level and even national level policies available to you. And it is sort of uncharted territory, but it is a good idea to get permission from students. And that partly, if you can go to the LMS, that is considered a more secure area where students are accessing Collaborate, for example, or Zoom within inside the LMS adds an extra security for students that's not going to be put out into the public space. But I'd be happy to follow up with some other best practices for our COVID website to make sure we're covering that question, because it's an important one.
And one other thing to add to what Susan just said, Margarita Martinez just posted this in the chat. There are ways to record Zoom where if you're giving a lecture and then having discussion with your students, you could record your lecture and not record the part where you're in discussion with students, right? And then that's just you as an individual giving permission for your own piece. Or if you're posting lectures and students are watching those recordings or listening to those recordings, that may be sufficient. You may not then need to record the Zoom sessions where you're in more discussion and active engagement. So different ways to think about that and to be flexible.
So we have a lot more questions than we can answer in the time that we have here. I'll just throw one more out there, Susan, and then we can kind of wrap up. But certainly I'll provide everyone with some follow-up resources. So if we did answer your question and you need it answered, we have a way you can sign up for some virtual consultations with us to address these kind of things. But so the last question is from Linda Swakowski. And it's really about labs. We've heard a lot from faculty who are teaching in a lab environment or something that is often hands-on. And I guess she's just asking, and this is really a question for everyone, not just our panelists, but how do you assess student performance if you have a lab? She said she's not really comfortable with a video done live with a student, or even are they able to have access to the equipment? She feels right now that not all courses can be converted to the online or fully online.
I'd love people to add an answer in the chat, because that's one thing we're looking at to try to figure out. One of the pieces that I've seen faculty do for labs is to have students write a report and pretty detailed about the steps that they've made. And again, asking sort of the questions that you're looking for in making sure they're compliant to the strategies, to the procedures that need to be done, so that when they do it, they can have the experience of it, but they reflect on it in a rigorous way to show that they have completed that and also answering their own questions. Another strategy also is kind of putting student agency into their own assessment. Like, how did it go for them? What do they feel like they're competent on? And what is challenging for them? And asking that kind of as a learning journal throughout the term is a great way to put them sort of at the center of their own learning and own abilities. And another I've seen is kind of doing case studies and scenarios where they are actually having to answer how a lab would actually work, kind of with fake data or pretend data. So they don't actually have to capture the data, but they have to analyze it in some way. And that's another strategy that I've seen for labs, but I'm sure there's plenty more coming into the chat.
Yeah, so we'll record these and hopefully be able to answer them with either some resources on the website or again, if you want to follow up with us, we welcome that. So we've got a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that we provide you with some important links and updates for our upcoming sessions. First thing in the chat, if you could. This is kind of for us. What would you like us to talk about? Next week webinar is we have some ideas, but we really want to hear from you about what would you like to hear for an hour next week. What topic would you like us to address that would help you with where you are now with your courses and moving online? So if you could just really post whatever ideas you have or suggestions, that'd be really helpful to us, and we'll review those. All right, they're coming in now. We have some resources available that Susan and John mentioned today. The first is Susan mentioned a lot of technology resources.
Yeah, Richard, I'll just say that this is a Google Doc that was put out. I want to say, I can't remember what institution, but it's a great comprehensive list organized into tech for needing a Wi-Fi connection, needing web conferencing, and a lot of the tech that I've mentioned is in that document. And again, we've placed this document, I'll link to it in the COVID site as well. And when we send this deck out, I'm going to add the COVID site onto this resource page. I realized I didn't do that. So just wanted to mention that, Richard.
And I'm going to go ahead and just post the link to that document in the chat so you can have that. So there are a lot of really valuable resources there, and many of that you mentioned today in the chat. Also, there's the link to the video from Drs. Wood and Harris, if you want to watch that. It's a YouTube video. And then a link to humanizing remote instruction. Some folks were asking about where those sources came from. And finally, as I mentioned at the top of this session, we do have our COVID-19 response resources at our Instructure site, our Canvas site. It's open to the public, so everyone should be able to access it. And you'll find not just the recordings for today's webinar, slides, but other really valuable resources like that list of technology resources that you can use. So I hope that's helpful to you. And we have 2 more of these webinars. Again, they're Wednesdays at 1 p.m. And there's a link kind of describing kind of the overall series that we're putting together. And Shauna is going to post the registration links into the chat. If you want to go ahead and register for the next 2, you can do that. But we really hope that you'll continue to, if you can, join us on these Wednesdays so we can hopefully help you out and provide you some important resources and strategies.
And we'll be announcing the topics for those tomorrow.
Okay. And we mentioned this a couple times here today, but this is really for AT&D member colleges. And we're offering virtual one-on-one consultations. So if you have a question, or if we didn't answer something today, or you really have something that you want some guidance on, we could set aside 45 minutes with ATD staff to address your question if we can, and to kind of talk you through whatever issue that you're having. We have our holistic student support team. here at ATD is also, they're providing a similar consultation. So if you're having questions around supporting students, maybe not in the classroom, but students that usually get some kind of service or support on campus, and they're now that the campus is closed, how do you continue with those? You can sign up for those consultations as well. We want to hear from you. We have a survey. We'll post that in the chat as well. And again, this is a place where you can tell us how we did. Did we meet your needs today? And also, what do you want us to, what kind of topics are you interested in us covering for the final 2 webinars that we have? So please, and if you could fill that out, sooner than later, we're going to turn around a decision here on the next webinar really quickly. So the sooner you can fill that out, we'd really appreciate it. And then you can always contact our team at teachingandlearning@achievingthedream.org, and we'll get those. And we appreciate you contacting us and give us any kind of feedback that you have or any questions that you have. And with that, it's a little 1 minute after 2. So we're going to wrap it up today. We want to thank our panelists for today, John Uzidi and Susan Adams. And thanks to all of you, and also the team behind the scenes, Shauna and Fran and Rwanda, for supporting kind of us in the back channel here. And again, thanks for your time. Hang in there and stay healthy. And hopefully we'll see you next week, if not before. Take care.